Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Monk Chat with Ayasoma and Bhante Sudaso. So we have a few friends who are checking in. So both Gita Jnana and Gita Ratnayake. Welcome, Gitas. Hello, Gabriella, Mark, and whoever else is logged in but not talking. Bradley, hello. And as usual, this is Monk Chat, which is your opportunity to ask whatever random things you want to ask. All the questions you've ever wanted to ask a Buddhist monk, now is your opportunity to ask not one, but two. Hello, Michael Spruill. So please go ahead and start entering questions. So in the past, we've maintained a rule of 2 questions maximum to start until we've gone through all the questions, and then everyone can ask additional questions, as many as they wish. And Gabriella's starting things off with a question.
But actually, there was another question ahead of that.
Did we?
Yes, Mark is asking, where's the cat? Under lockdown again.
Does that count as one of his questions?
I don't know about one of his questions, but it is a question. So, Stan the cat is in lockdown of the lockdown. He's currently segregated in one part of the monastery because whenever he comes out, he starts knocking things down. So we decided to keep him there for the time being. And then we'll see.
Okay. And Gabriella is wishing us well for Vasa. Thank you. That's very kind.
Thank you.
And so moving on to the first question, second question, that's true. Gabriella asks, you mentioned last chat that almost everything fits under the purview of karma. But the Buddha has mentioned that all intentional actions are karma and that there are other things that aren't. So what are some things that are not under the purview of karma? And if it is all under the purview of karma, then how do our actions not fall under a totally deterministic, fatalistic worldview where no actions make an impact, since all actions are impacted solely by previous actions? So this is a question where me and Ayasoma may give slightly different answers. So I'll start. So my understanding is that, in fact, everything we experience is indeed the result of past karma. So intentional actions create karma. As long as one recognizes that negligence is also an intentional choice, and therefore negligence also creates karma. This is a very important point that doesn't often get emphasized sufficiently. So some people, for example, they see a bunch of ants on the ground, so they think, well, if I just don't look at them as I walk over them, then I'm not intentionally killing. It's like, well, that's true, you're not intentionally killing, but you are intentionally being negligent in a way that causes harm to other living beings. So it's important to keep in mind when we say that only intentional actions are karma, that we recognize that negligence is also an intentional choice and therefore is karma. Yeah, and as I understand it, everything that we experience is in fact the result of our past choices, usually from previous lives, but sometimes also from earlier in this life. But this does not mean determinism or fatalism, because in each moment we are making new choices. And the choices we make are not determined by what we've done in the past. We always have the option to do something different. So, for example, somebody who has a habit of watching TV from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. every single day, they might have a strong tendency to turn on the TV at 4 p.m., but they might choose not to. They might decide, well, today I will not watch TV at 4 p.m. Instead, I will do some meditation. So that's karma. It's not deterministic. It's not fatalistic. They might be likely to turn on the TV because of their strong habit, They might have a TV in every room because of past choices they made to buy a lot of TVs, but they're not forced to make any particular choice. They can always choose to do something different. So saying that everything we experience is the result of past karma does not imply determinism or fatalism. We still make choices in every moment, and those choices do create results. So those are my reflections on this. I should also point out that there is one particular sutta in the Pali Canon which is sometimes quoted as evidence for not everything being the result of karma. And so it's a sutta where a Brahmin asks the Buddha, is all pain directly caused by karma? And the Buddha says no. He says some is caused by karma, but some is caused by other conditions, such as illness or malnutrition or changes in the weather and so on. But then the question is, well, why were you born into a body that's prone to illness? Past karma. Why were you unable to get nourishing food? Past karma. Why were you living somewhere with harmful weather conditions? Past karma. So it still winds up being the result of karma, just indirectly rather than directly. So I'm aware of that one sutta, which is sometimes used to claim that not everything we experience is karma, but I also don't see it as being sufficient evidence to back up that view, particularly since everything else in the sutta seems to clearly indicate that everything is karma. Those are my thoughts on the matter. Aya, do you have anything you want to say?
I think we actually do not really disagree.
Oh, okay. I thought we disagreed a bit on this one.
No, but I think it's very important to pay attention to the terminology that we use. This is not referred to what Bante said, but actually, for example, in how you pose the question, which is not a criticism of your question at all, but rather that's kind of what we tend to do. Whenever we hear that everything is karma, we tend to sort of go into the camp of, well, then there is sort of no responsibility of any kind of action that I'm making. Everything is already determined, and we can take a fatalistic view. And on the other hand, it can become very confusing to understand our experience. So we try to make either too many connections, thinking, okay, I'm experiencing this because I did this in the past, or that person, especially when we do it to others, that person is experiencing that because of their karma. And so it becomes karma, instead of becoming a teaching that is very helpful and useful to understand causality, becomes a sort of either instrument for self-guilt or an instrument to actually justify injustice or justify the harm that is being done to other people, and an excuse not to instead practice compassion, practice kindness, practice generosity. Because it's until we are enlightened beings, we actually have not really much idea of what exactly are the causes and conditions that bring certain results. So it's very important to be careful in our approach, in our understanding of karma, and to use it rather as a skillful means to take responsibility of our actions, and also not take too seriously what is happening in our life. So understanding that each single being has been around and about for countless eons. And in these countless eons, we've, for example, not been Buddhist monks the entire time. We've probably been Buddhist monks before, actually most likely, mostly guaranteed, and it didn't go too well. So we kind of got distracted a little bit, and perhaps went all the way to harming others. Perhaps we both were in the past serial killers. So we've been on the sort of opposite end of the spectrum multiple times. So it's inevitable that we're going to receive the results of our previous actions, both positive and negative, or actually both wholesome and unwholesome, or whatever we think that it's positive and negative, so to speak. And really what is important is how we face the adversities, and how we face also what is kind of pleasant that is coming up in our lives. So this is what is important. It's not important to say like, oh, look at the great things that I have right now. I was a really good person. I deserve this. Not like those poor people outside that are starving. Oh, it's their karma. They've done awful things. Well, actually, what goes around comes around, and sooner rather than later, we're going to be the ones that will be in a sort of situation of distress. So it's very important, as actually Bhante Buddharakkhita says, to cultivate non-judgment day. We tend to be so judgmental. So instead, we want to cultivate a mind that is non-judgmental, and always thinking, well, how can I help others? So that then when I will be in any kind of situation of distress, then also others will be there to help me. And that is a skillful means in terms of understanding that, once again, yes, we are reaping the results of our previous actions, but at the same time, if we act unskillfully, we're going to also produce new karma that is going to generate other results in the future.
And Gabriella's second question, she says, what are the best methods to eliminate the 3 lower fetters that prevent stream entry? So I asked my preceptor this question many years ago, and he replied, follow the Noble Eightfold Path.
Makes sense. And Jason says, cats will be cats.
Yeah.
Oh, and welcome to Kami.
Great. And so Mark asks, did you want to say something else on the stream entry question?
No, that is very on point.
Yeah. Mark says, when sleepiness occurs during meditation, I had a teacher say that this is because of mind resistance, not necessarily fatigue. Is the mind alive or more like a machine of habits, according to the Buddha? Well, first off, sleepiness during meditation can be caused by a lot of different things. Sometimes it is, in fact, mental resistance to one's experience. Sometimes it's resistance to one's meditation method, actually. And sometimes sleepiness during meditation actually is physical fatigue. But often it's just we're not very interested in our meditation method. We're not very interested in the technique that we're using. So in that case, sometimes we need to use a different method, something that's more interesting to us. So for example, if you have this idea that you're obligated to practice mindfulness of breathing, and you're like, okay, now I will sit down and focus on the breathing. Holy hell, this is so boring. So boring. Well, of course you're going to get sleepy, because that's your only escape. Your only escape options are either sleepiness or restless thinking. So you'll go into one of those two. So try to choose a meditation method that's actually interesting to you, and that will eliminate most of your drowsiness. Do also make sure that you're getting enough rest. Some people hear about Burmese monks who only sleep 4 hours a night, and then they try to do that themselves. And that only works if you have extremely strong samadhi and you live an extremely simple life and you practice meditation 16 hours a day. then you can get away with 4 hours of sleep. Most people can't. But some people try getting away with tiny amounts of sleep, and then they're falling asleep in meditation just because they're really not getting enough sleep at night. So make sure you actually are resting enough. And you're using a method that you are interested in. And then you find you won't have much sleepiness. Yeah. As for, is the mind alive or more like a machine of habits? Well, it depends on what you mean by alive, and it depends on what you mean by machine. So I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. Ayasoma, do you have any thoughts on this? On either part of the question. Yeah.
Mind alive or more like a machine of habits, according to the Buddha. He never used that terminology. But that's definitely, I would say, the experience of most people, that it's both alive and a machine of habits. So once you start looking at it, you're like, oh, well, it has kind of like a sort of life of its own. And it kind of acts in automatic based on the strong habits that we have cultivated. And this is very easily seen actually in meditation when we are experiencing, I wouldn't call it sleepiness, but actually drowsiness. And that oftentimes when it happens, in my experience, it's the cause of the strong habits of delusion that we've cultivated in the past, which create this sort of strong tendency of spacing out, of not really wanting to see what is currently present. And we have a strong tendency of ignorance, of thinking that there is something more delicious out there than just, paying attention to our hands or paying attention to the breath. And the more we practice meditation, the more we see how strong also this tendency is, because whenever actually we manage to practice, we really put a lot of effort and we really stay with the meditation object, we see the immediate effects on the mind of happiness, of clarity, of peace. So there's clearly like a direct kind of wholesome effect that we recognize. Yet the mind will kind of go on a sort of, next time we'll try still to go like towards craving something else, which then will create more drowsiness, spaciness, confusion, and ultimately ignorance. So that's where, we have to both contemplate, like really look at our mind and be honest with ourselves and go, okay, well, right now I'm getting back into this habit, and looking at the strength of the habit, of how much it's sort of magnetically attracting us over there, and putting the effort to create a new habit over and over again, over and over again. It's very interesting because I think I was talking about it last week, but we still have these Italian cookies that appear in the morning for breakfast. And I used to eat them in a very unmindful way. Actually, a lot of the Italian stuff that appeared here in the kitchen in the past couple of weeks have been really interesting for me, because it was a lot of stuff that I was eating growing up, and also especially as an adolescent, actually, where I was using food for fun and for pleasure and not really for the health of the body. So I would just kind of swallow chunks of cookies, chunks of whatever was there in a very unmindful way. And with Buddhist practice, I've made a lot of progress actually in sort of becoming aware of how I was eating and the impacts in in my mind, and eating not for fun, not for pleasure, but only for the sustenance of this body. Yet with these cookies, I've noticed how it was very difficult for me to practice, because there were these strong habits related on these particular sort of sense pleasure that I hadn't really kind of worked with, because I've been in the United States for the past 11 years. So it was really interesting to see how it would fall back into the past habits. And yeah, in a sense, my mind had a life of its own, and it was going, was a, strong habits, however you described it. But at the same time, there was, which you can call actually vipaka, like the results of the previous karma. But in every single moment, if I would catch my mind, I would actually have the ability to make a different choice. And I would see that a lot of times deliberately I would make the same choice. And that's when I would go like, okay, actually, no, now I will make a different choice. So that is what we have to do. We have to be constantly honest with ourselves, not pretending that all these strong habits, the mind is alive and does its own thing. It's partly true, but because we have trained it to do that. So apparently it looks like it does its own thing, but in reality it doesn't. It's no different than Stan. I trained Stan to sit down before he eats. When I say, Stan, sit. So it appears like he does it on its own. It's not. He's been trained. So it's no different. Our mind, we've trained it to do that. So just like we've trained it to do that, we can train the mind to go towards awakening rather than suffering. And how do we do that? The Noble Eightfold Path.
Okay. And Michael Sproul asks, can you say something about the 32 marks of the great man? Dirt not sticking to skin, the Buddha bathed and washed feet. I thought I heard the marks were in the Upanishads. Mm-hmm. So, first off, I should just say I've never been the least bit interested in the 32 marks of a great man. I remember the first couple times I came across them in the suttas, I just immediately set them aside as something that was completely irrelevant. So it didn't stick in my mind at all. And then later on, I discovered that for some people, this is like a huge problem for them. The existence of the 32 marks is like a serious dampener on their faith. And I was always like, what's the big deal? So it's like it's this random cryptic little thing. And if you read it in Pali, the 32 marks in Pali, they're really cryptic. Like they make virtually no sense in Pali. So I suspect then, so the translators who have translated them into English, they're just kind of stabbing in the dark. And in fact, Maurice Walsh's translation in the Digha Nikaya of the 32 marks, when I read them in English the first time, I was like, wow, this is some really bizarre stuff. And I read them in Pali and I was like, well, his translation doesn't really have much to do with what it says in the Pali. So I don't know where he got his translations from. The commentaries, of course, had a field day with the 32 marks and said all kinds of weird things about them. So it's useful to look at what the actual Pali words are for the 32 marks. And you'll see that they're actually not like bizarre, freakish things as some people like to think they are. But you'll also see that there's a lot of different ways to interpret them, and it's not really clear what they're talking about. The dirt not sticking to skin, is that one of the 32? I don't remember that being on the list of 32. Anyway, some scholars think that the 32 marks are a later addition, that they weren't the Buddha's own words, but that they were a later addition to the suttas. I don't know whether they are or not. It just strikes me as such an insignificant thing, has no doctrinal importance whatsoever. So it just never struck me as being the least bit important. It was just one of those little peculiarities about the suttas that doesn't affect the doctrinal content of the suttas at all, and thus is not worth getting hung up on. Some people also claim that the 32 marks are inherently masculine, but that's also something where when you read it in Pali, that's not the case. None of the 32 marks necessarily require that the possessor of the marks be male. So also it could be then 32 marks of a great person. It's not necessarily only male people. But yeah, it just never struck me as being even remotely important. So I was actually quite baffled when I learned how many people are really thrown off balance by the mention of the 32 marks. Any thoughts on the 32 marks?
Not really.
Okay, do you take this next one, Joseph Rios?
Let's see, sure. Hello, Joseph, by the way. Nice to see you online. I mean, I always only see you online. Hopefully we'll see you in person soon. And Joseph says, my meditation practice has really suffered lately. As a mixed foreign-born person, the situation in the US is taxing, stressful. I want to be involved, but my practice suffers. What to do? Yeah, well, first of all, I'm sorry that you're going through a hard time. And yeah, it is a quite stressful situation for a lot of people. And actually, this is when we have the opportunity to really see what the Buddha is talking about. So the first noble truth we have to remember that is the truth of suffering. It's not the truth of like, oh, I have everything that I want and it's still not making me quite satisfied. Or, oh, I'm a little bit bored today. I mean, there's also that, of course, in the definition of dukkha. But when the Buddha talks about dukkha, first and foremost, he's talking about existential dukkha. So birth, old age, sickness, and death. So this is what we're trying to transcend. And right now, I have to say that this pandemic has created the conditions for all of us to really see the First Noble Truth in a very direct way without us being able to kind of do actually what a lot of us do during meditation, without spacing out, without pretending that it's not there, blocking things out, and cultivating ignorance. So it's so strong, I would say, the sort of the characteristics of the First Noble Truth right now that we can't not look at it. And Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi told me a few years ago this thing, made this statement that really made an impression on my mind really strongly. And it was that we don't practice despite the obstacles, but the obstacles are the path. And it's a very important, profound statement. Because sometimes we can, use these precious teachings as something that makes us feel like 10% happier or whatever during our day-to-day life, makes us more efficient in our job, slightly better partner, and, tolerate more our day-to-day life. And that's all good. That's all well and good. But then our kind of like picture perfect sort of situation, experience of reality, as soon as something major happens, then pam, gets torn away. But that's actually the opportunity for practice, because this is inevitable. It's really inevitable to experience old age, sickness, and death. By one birth, get actually all of the other three free. Get old age, sickness, and death, all included. So we need to work on it, but also at the same time practice compassion for ourselves. So without going like, oh, bad practitioner, you weren't able to meditate this morning. You weren't like, oh, you were supposed to do this and that. Rather like having a nice balance of both going, well, what does the Buddha say about, what to cultivate? And when we kind of don't, meet the standard, as my preceptor says, so the Buddha gives us very lofty goals. Our duty is to actually check, like on the map, kind of like the map, right? If Canada is here, we're here. But we need to know that we're here. We can't say, oh, I think I'm here. And then we're like, oh, actually, I'm not even close to Canada. I'm actually in Florida. No, we need to know where we are. So kind of having, being quite honest, having a sort of understanding, and then being compassionate with ourselves and saying, okay, well, right now, due to these causes and conditions, I'm struggling keeping up a meditation practice. And that is okay. And I will put a little bit more effort. To quote another venerable, you're perfect just the way you are, and you need a little work. That's Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. So always understanding that we are where we are. And that's totally okay. It's fine. So you're reacting the way that you're reacting, and there are causes and conditions that, give us an understanding of why that's happening. And we're pointing ourselves in the right direction. And we're going, okay, so are there wholesome mind states or unwholesome mind states in the mind? Has suffering increased or decreased? Being honest, and then going, okay, so what does the Buddha recommend doing? And I do that. But without like self-flagellating or being too kind of too kind with ourselves. We want a nice balance. Both like, oh, good girl, Soma, and then, okay, Soma, come on, get up and do something, right?
Yeah, one thing I would just add to that. So everything she said, but one thing I would add to that is ask yourself, what can I do to help? So you say the condition in the US is pretty heartrending right now, and I agree. It's a total mess in many different areas. So between the pandemic situation and the systemic racism problem, there's a lot to be concerned about. But that also means there's a lot of opportunities to help. So instead of lamenting like, oh, it's such a mess in this country, because it is, there's no denying it's a mess in this country. But instead of lamenting that, instead we can ask, what can I do to help? So it might be as simple a thing as donating to a charity, supporting an organization that's taking care of the needy, or that's supporting racial justice. Sometimes it's a matter of being kind to strangers, people that your neighbors maybe, find out if they need help with anything. Ask yourself, what can I do to help? How can I ease the burden of others? Okay, and do you want to take the next question as well, Ishan?
So Ishan is asking, dear Bantenaya, excuse me, the conditioning since birth is impacting actions right now. And when I start recognizing them and I try to get rid of those conditionings, I try to come in a restrictive mode, like restricting myself, using pressure, extra effort to eradicate it, but then it rebounds back. How to deal with this? Thank you. Well. So this is where actually the concept of non-self is very useful, but not in the way through which you are understanding that you're applying in a non-effective way. What it seems to me that you're doing is repression rather than understanding. So there is understanding at the very beginning, but then instead of keeping on understanding the previous conditioning, there is the repression. So you start with understanding, which is actually getting close to an experiential understanding of non-self. But when you understand that pretty much any conditioning that you have is the product of causes and conditions in the past, then you also understand that you don't have much power over them. And this is a tricky thing, isn't it? Because we just said that that actually we can make different actions, and we can. But let me explain, give you a different example. So for example, when there is a lot of distress in the mind, a lot of times this has happened, still happens, not as much as it did in the past, but say I'm really, a lot of distress in the mind, and I'm like, oh, I really don't want to cry, and I start like really pouring. And why is that so? Because I'm fooling myself thinking that I am the one crying, which means that I have power over these tears and I have power over my emotions. I'm the creator of my emotions, so in this second, I can decide for them to stop. Just like I have the delusion that this body is who I am. But if actually this body was who I am, then if I just wanted right now, it would go like, oh, Soma has 50 pounds less or whatever. I don't know how many 50 pounds are. Is that a lot? Well, like 5 kilos less, 10 kilos less. But I can't do that, can I? Or now someone's going to have really long hair. Can't do that, right? Why can't I do that? If this was mine, this was me, I could decide in 1 second to shift it radically. And we kind of get that, right? We get it a little bit, even without actually practicing Buddhism. We kind of get the sense that we can't really like decide in a minute or in a second, or even days, or like we have to really work on shifting the body, right? So if I want like 10 kilos less, I better like work on creating the conditions to drop 10 pounds, 10 kilos. I'm like shifting from pounds to kilos. And if I want long hair, well, I need to create the conditions for the hair to grow. So shaving it every other day, every other couple of days, every week or so doesn't really help the cause of growing hair. So it's the same with our emotions. It's the same with our strong habits. We need to understand that we are not the owners. What we do is create causes and conditions for results to happen, which is these strong habits. So this is what we're currently dealing with. So our duty is not to repress whatever is currently going on, because that's completely absurd. But rather, our duty is to create causes and conditions for new results to happen. And how do you do that? The Noble Eightfold Path. So that's my answer.
Good. Okay. And Gabriella asked a third question, but we still have a few more questions to go. So Gabriella, maybe if you could save your question 3 and then post it again after we go through the other questions. Then Danilo says, today I was not able to do anything productive other than read a few pages and meditate for 2 hours. That actually sounds quite good.
Great.
Yeah, I was like, wow. I mean,
That's like more productive than 99.9% of the human population today.
Yeah, I mean, that's more productive than many monks, actually. So I don't actually see what reason you would have to be angry at yourself. So you say you relaxed pretty much the entire day. Well, actually,
That's so good.
sometimes that's the right thing to do. Sometimes the right thing to do is to just relax and not push yourself too much. So it's important to know when it's the right time to push and when it's the right time to relax. But actually, I mean, if you read some Dhamma and you did 2 hours of meditation, that's actually pretty good. If you do that every day, you'll consistently make steady progress. Of course, it's good to have days when you do push yourself, but it's also good to have days when you relax and you don't push yourself too hard. So in monasteries, usually we have several days in a row where we follow a pretty rigorous schedule. It depends on the monastery, of course. Several days of following a pretty rigorous schedule. And then there's usually a couple days of very relaxed schedule. 1 or 2 days where you might have nothing at all that you're required to do. And that's because it's really helpful to have days where you just relax and you don't do much of anything. It helps to release some of the tension that can come up when we're striving at our practice in a overly intense or aggressive way. So it's good to have relaxed days. And also, I would encourage you to delight in the fact that you did 2 hours of meditation and read some Dhamma. That's no small thing. So pat yourself on the back. You did well. Anything?
No, that's great. And
Well,
Leila is asking, space. Could you clarify in which way space is conditioned? I think this is a great question for you, Bante.
Okay. Well, first off, it's an interesting thing that in the Theravada Abhidhamma, space is considered a sankhara, conditioned, and only nibbana is considered unconditioned. But in the Sarvastivada Abhidhamma, space was also considered an unconditioned element, distinct from nibbana. Personally, I find their arguments for this quite unconvincing. I would say that actually space is in fact a sankhara. It is in fact conditioned. And the reason for that is because space can be defined in terms of either empty or full. There's empty space and there's full space. So to some extent, you can define the condition of space in terms of the presence or absence of other sankharas. Whereas nibbana cannot be defined in terms of any sankhara. So for this reason, I would say that only nibbana is asankhata, so unconditioned, free of sankharas. Whereas space is still sankhata, because it has different conditions that it can be in. And those conditions can be defined in terms of the presence or absence of other sankharas. Also, space can be either limited or unlimited, as well as either empty or full. So that also gives an indication that space is not asankhata, it's not unconditioned. Okay.
All right, and Pavan is saying, if I recall, a Vedic man asked the Buddha about the 32 marks, and he said, only feature of a great man is a trained mind. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Now that's Dhamma.
Yeah, that's
great.
a good
Thanks
answer.
You for sharing that. And Pawan also asks, my question this evening is how to help a friend who has anxiety. Meditation seems to put him to sleepiness. Well, my suggestion is for your friend to actually focus on cultivating sila. So giving a lot and a lot and a lot. So really looking at how can they help others. And also if they can, perhaps going to the temple if your friend is Buddhist and offering. So dana is a really great antidote for a lot of the sort of mental afflictions like anxiety. And yeah, obviously, the more you give, the more you let go, the more happiness arises, and the more the mind becomes more peaceful. And then it's easier for the mind to meditate. A happy mind gets easily concentrated, says the Buddha. So that's why, actually, in Asian Buddhism, there's such an emphasis on cultivating giving and, of course, at large, sila in general.
Yeah, that's good. And Elaine asked, what will we be doing during retreat? Silent. So yes, our retreat will be silent from start to finish. Hallelujah. We'll be shutting off our computers and phones and just focusing mostly on meditation practice and maintaining constant mindfulness and samadhi. So personally, I'm really looking forward to it.
Me too. Yay.
Yeah, it's been long overdue. Since the pandemic started, we've been pushing ourselves pretty hard. And it's time to give ourselves a break and focus on samadhi for a couple of weeks. So Michael says, I think it was golden. So talking again about the 32 marks. So there's a few. Oh, you skipped some things.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, they're all about the
marks 32 marks. Yeah, so the only one that was mentioned here, so Mumble Rock said, wasn't one of the 32 marks a well-retracted male organ? Well, that's actually one of the more peculiar and obscure ones of the 32 marks where the meaning of it is quite difficult to figure out. And there's a lot of debate among scholars as to just what the heck it's talking about. And it doesn't specify male organ. So this is another interesting thing about how certain Pali terms can come to be translated in a specific way, which does not necessarily represent the whole range of meaning of the original terms. So that mark also does not specify maleness in particular. That's just one interpretation, which probably comes from the commentaries.
Let's all focus on training the mind, because that is really a good mark of a great man.
Yeah. Michael Spruill asked about golden skin that dirt doesn't adhere to. Yeah, I'd have to see the Pali again. I don't remember off the top of my head. It says, guess it bugged me that the councils would keep it in if it came from the Upanishads.
Well, there's get prepared. There's a lot of interesting things that kind of contaminated the Pali Canon, but we still have most of it is really incredible and full of real Dhamma. And then there's some Dhamma sprinkled here and there, but that is inevitable with 2,500 years of unenlightened beings after the Buddha.
Yeah, actually, if you develop a very strong, clear Dhamma detector, very strong, clear Dhamma meter, then you can clearly identify the contaminations in the suttas. They're quite rare. There's only a handful throughout the entire Pali Canon. There's only a handful of places where there's clear alteration or contamination from after the Buddha. And when your Dhamma detector is well refined, you can spot them immediately because they don't fit in with the rest of the material in the Dhamma. So Mark asks, does the Buddha ever talk about spirit versus different types of energy in the way Christians and Hindus and other groups do? Well, to be honest, I'm not really familiar with how Christians and Hindus and other groups talk about spirit, because for the past 20 years, I've been focused entirely on Buddhism. So I've kind of lost track with what other people talk about and how they talk about it. And to be honest, I'm not terribly interested. So briefly speaking, the Buddha never talks about spirit ever.
Unless you talk spirit is devas or different.
Oh, yeah. But like spirit energy, again, I don't even know what that means. So maybe if it was defined, we could talk about whether or not the Buddha speaks about something similar.
There are ghosts. How do you
No,
talk about it in
there are
Christianity, the spirit?
there are spirits, but I think he's talking about different types of energy. So
I mean, I was born in Italy, so what kind of spirits are they? Spirito Santo and Saint
angels,
Spirit,
I guess, angels and demons,
Holy
and things.
Spirit, Holy Spirit, and then there are angels, right? So that's
Yeah, so we've got those for sure. Yeah, we have all kinds of spirits. Yeah, so I think if you clarify what you mean, we'll have a better shot at answering that. Danilo says, I actually meditate for 2 hours every day. That's great. 2 45-minute meditations and 1 30-minute. Every other day I do extra. Yeah, it's good. She says, I'm glad to know that I make good progress. I keep thinking that I sometimes don't do enough. Yeah, that's because you sometimes don't do enough. So it's good. Push yourself. Do a bit more. But also congratulate yourself for all the good that you're doing. So congratulating yourself for your goodness does not mean that you stop pushing yourself. And pushing yourself does not mean that you stop congratulating yourself. These are not mutually exclusive. Do you want to take the next one?
There isn't.
Oh, I think he's clarifying here.
Oh, in Hindu cosmology, this world is a mix of matter and spirit, but beyond the void, the fifth great realm, in the first realm of spirit, where all is spirit.
So what I would say is, from a Buddhist perspective, there is one way of looking at it is that there is physical and mental, physical objects and mental objects, physical domain and mental domain. But from another perspective within Buddhism, there is only the mental domain. There's only mind. And everything is mind. Everything is contained within mind and made of mind, and made by mind. In fact, that's the first line of the Dhammapada. So one perspective is that there's only mind. So in that sense, if you're making a distinction between matter and spirit, then everything is spirit. And the appearance of matter is just a certain kind of mind object.
All right. And that is asking, are you going away from the monastery to a retreat center? Well, it's good, very convenient that this is a monastery and retreat center. So, so we're just walking from one room to the other. Yes, we will be staying here, and actually we'll have some lay friends joining us for the retreat. So we will all be supporting one another. It will be just a small group.
Yeah, I think 3 or 4 people will be coming. So it's just a very small group of people so that we can all support each other. Because it's, even though there's only 2 of us these days, it is a big monastery and there's a lot of work to do to keep the place running day to day. So it's very helpful that a couple of friends are coming to help us with the daily maintenance. Yeah, and Elaine says, in solidarity, she will speak as little as possible and meditate more. That's great. Yeah. Take the time to do your own solo retreat, your own self retreat. Yeah.
Oh, you're such a sweetheart, Elaine.
Okay, so we're back to Gabriella's question. She says, what are some samadhi practices you both recommend to all students of Dhamma, and which one works the best for you? So for me, the answer there is the same, mindfulness of the body. It works great for me, and I recommend it for everyone. And one reason I recommend it for everyone is because it's a very safe, reliable samadhi method, which works very well for most people. Mindfulness of the body also gives you a lot of different options. There's a lot of different ways to practice mindfulness of the body. So you're not pigeonholed into only one way of practicing. So it also has enough variety and flexibility that most people can find some kind of body mindfulness practice that works for them. Thoughts?
What he said, well, and he's taught me actually how to meditate, so it's true. And the Gita says, when I try to let go of things, the mind keeps a strong hold on them. When I try to let go of things, mind keeps a strong hold on them. It is like two minds working against each other. How can we train the mind to let go? Well, this is, it's very interesting, because when I came to Buddhist practice, my mind was extremely obsessive. So I would really fixate on things and obsess about them night and day, night and day, night and day, night and day. And to a certain extent, this strong habit is still somewhat present in the current mind of today. It's in my current mind of today. But it's latent. So how do you say latent tendency, as opposed to a predominant tendency? And the way that it shifted from a predominant tendency that was kind of like how do you call that thing? The vortex. Not a hurricane, tornado. I remember watching it when I was in Italy. All these like weird calamities that were happening in this country that don't happen where I come from. So tornado, I was like, wow, this tornado sucks everything. Defying, what I perceived as gravity, like a gigantic house would come up all the way up, and that was basically my experience of reality. Like whatever kind of sort of obsession, something that my mind would really crave or get hung up with, it would create this tornado that would suck up my entire existence. And I remember actually this tendency of mine created, interestingly enough, the best conditions for me to actually have lots of benefits immediately on meditation retreats. And it's because, for example, I remember I was on retreat and there was this person that I had created this whole story in my mind, and I really wanted to talk to them. And I knew that it was impossible during the retreat. And I knew that there was going to be very little time after the retreat, and my mind started going insane. Like, I need to talk to this person now. I need to talk to this person now. It's a matter of vital concern. Like, kind of crazy. Actually, not kind of. Like, totally insane. But because I wasn't out and about in daily life, where I could kind of either distract myself or really pursue, for example, talking to that person, the only thing I could do was actually watch the mind, look at the mind. And at the very beginning, it was extremely unsettling and unhappy and unpleasant. But then after a while, during the second day or so that the mind was still on the tendency, I remember just looking at it and going, okay, this is what a strong obsessive mind feels like. This is what it is. So instead of wanting it to be different, instead of trying to repress it, or instead of keeping on chasing whatever I'm craving, my obsessive idea, I can drop both of these sort of cravings, any kind of craving, and just sit with it. And by sit with it, I mean like not wanting for things to be different. As Ajahn Chah says, as Ajahn Sumedho say, it's just like this. In other words, it is what it is. Like, look at it. So if, I take this thing and I want it to be gray, light gray, so it's dark gray, I will suffer so much, right? Because it's dark gray over here. So if I keep on going, it's dark gray, why is it like not yellow? Yellow, I want it to be yellow. Why is it not red? Oh, like it creates a lot of distress. But what we're doing is actually not looking at it. But when we turn around and we're like, oh, it's dark gray. Then we start actually seeing it, learning it, understanding it. And then it's not a problem anymore. So we start recognizing it. And as soon as whatever kind of mind tendency comes up, we are familiar with it. We recognize it. It's not a stranger that startles us, and like a tornado, like sucks up our entire existence. Just someone that we're like, oh, there you go. It's that old friend of mine. Okay. It's fine. Everything is impermanent. Is my mind obsessed all the time? No, it's not. Sometimes it's obsessed. Sometimes it's not obsessed. Is my mind disturbed all the time? No, sometimes it is. Sometimes it's not. So clearly, whatever we're experiencing in the moment, even though it's a strong mind tendency, it's still impermanent. And is impermanent, is what is impermanent who we are? How can it be who we are? How can it be ours? So this is not who we are. This is not me. This is not mine. This is not who I am. But not as an intellectual experiment, as a lived experience. So these are all things that we look within, understand with practice. And the more we practice this way, the more it starts losing the grip on us. And that's to, instead of being two minds working against each other, instead of like going like, be in this way, mind. Be peaceful. Like, really? We want to be peaceful. We start like, being aggressive. That's not following the Buddhist teachings. So if we want to be peaceful while agitated, we just stop fueling the agitation. We don't want we don't want to forcefully stop the agitation, because that doesn't make any sense, But we stop fueling it. And that's when we become peaceful. We're like, oh, okay, great. But of course, it's trial and error, and always watching the mind, always seeing and comparing it to what the Buddha says. And that's when we see that whenever we act in accordance to Dhamma, happiness arises, peace increases, wholesomeness increases, suffering decreases. And whenever we disregard the Buddhist teachings and we think we know better, so we're like, oh yes, now I'm gonna like forcefully like get to this, fire with fire. Suffering arises, disturbance increases, peacefulness decreases, like we do the opposite. So sometimes if we can't do the previous thing, it's just actually seeing the effects. So if we don't have, wholesome mind states don't increase, but they decrease, then the problem is not the practice. The problem is that we're not practicing correctly. See what I mean? So then we have to kind of either go to a senior practitioner, someone ahead of us in the path, and go like, hey, I'm doing all of these things. What do you think about it? And then the person will advise you. So then you can reconfigure the things. Or you can do it by yourself and keep reading the suttas and checking what does the Buddha say. But yeah, you can see it by the effects. Very clear answer.
Okay, and Danilo says the close monastery to her is Gelug. And yeah, the Gelug order is a very respectable branch of Tibetan Buddhism. I mean, that's the Dalai Lama's branch. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with the Gelug.
Thumbs up.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the end of the questions for the evening. So if no other questions appear within the next few seconds, we'll go ahead and end for now. So just a reminder that we will be going on retreat starting next week. So this will be the last live stream until the 29th. So for the next 2 weeks, there will be no live streams. And then we'll resume again the third week. So that's July 29th. We'll start up again with the same schedule. Oh, wait. Michael has a question.
Last question.
Okay. So Michael asks, I had several super sublime letting go periods after traumatic teenage events. Were they spontaneous dips into samadhi or jhana? Curious if you both had any. Thanks. Well, that's much too vague for me to have any idea what they were. Sometimes when something really extreme happens, it breaks us out of our mental habits for a little while, and it gives us a different perspective. And if we have a certain amount of mental clarity and self-restraint, then those moments can be very liberating. If we lack wisdom and self-restraint, those moments can just cause even further psychological harm. So I'm happy to hear that it went positively for you. As for what they were, I actually strongly doubt it was dips into samadhi, spontaneous dips into samadhi. More likely, it was just a moment of letting go, a moment of dropping the inner tension that you'd been holding on to. But again, it's hard to say. I would need more information.
Anyway. All right. And I think that's all this time.
Okay.
Really, all for the evening. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. So on the 29th, we'll be together again, I hope. So in the meanwhile, we can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.